You can see all the values that we assigned when we are creating the key, but you also see a few additional fields. You see the machine ID field, a note field, and finally the key itself that was generated. Um, this machine ID field, it stores the last ID that was used in validation. So in your application, when you're programming, when you're configuring the license vault DLL to work in your program, you will have the option to pass in either one of the built-in machine ID values or a custom ID. And the idea behind that is that you want to make sure that your application runs on one system, and it can't be installed, inordinately on every system. So you have the option to use the machine ID to narrow down how many installs can happen throughout your customer's network. So what you put in a machine ID affects how many times a key can be, I should say, how many different places a key can be validated. So if you wanted to create a site-wide usable key, you would use something like maybe a particular value that was available in all the machines on your network, be it perhaps a domain name or a domain SID, Windows SID, and that way when the validation system occurred, it would find the same value in all the machines on a particular network. If you wanted your application to work on a single machine, then you might use something like the processor ID or maybe a MAC address, something that would apply specifically to that machine and it couldn't exist on another machine on the same network. And so that's how you use the machine ID, and it's available. You can program the License Vault Client DLL to use either your own custom IDs or one of the pre-built IDs. Alright, the next thing we have is a note field. It's neat to be able to store information about a particular license. Perhaps you want to store how many times you've been contacted by a customer with that given license, and you might want to keep notes on how many times there were issues related to a product per the license key. So associating a note to the license key might allow you to do that better. The next thing you have is finally the actual license key that was created, and you can use this field to just simply copy the license key if you need to for any reason. So that's what's in the Gen Key Info tab. You'll notice there's a second tab called Validation Attempts, and we're going to look at this Validation Attempts tab in one of the following videos when we look at license key validation. But the idea behind this tab is that you can see how many times the key has been validated, and if any failed attempts have occurred, you can see them here as well, and information about that will appear here, such as the IP address on the machine which attempted to validate, the machine ID, whatever custom ID you provided when you developed your application and when you integrated License Vault Client with it. That will also appear here. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen, in this Edit Key Info screen, that we have two buttons. One says Test Validation and another that says Clear Validation. The idea behind this is that you want to be able to see what will happen to your key when you attempt to validate using it. So you want to see what the client, what your customer will see, right? Or what your application will have returned to it when you attempt to validate. You can do that by clicking that. Clear validation clears all the entries, past entries of validation. Sometimes you may have a customer that tries to perhaps has a computer failure or something and loses validation um, because he has not uninstalled a key prior to reinstalling your application. So you may have a previous validation here that's inaccurate. Perhaps another scenario that comes to mind is if you associated the machine ID to the MAC address. Well, if your customer replaces particular hardware, be it the network card, the MAC address would change, and so um, the technically the license would become invalid. So you may need to go in here and, prompted by a customer, you might need to come in here and clear the validation system so that the customer can revalidate the software. Now, as I mentioned before, during the validation process, a license object is returned to the client. So you have the ability to store that on the client side and use it for validation without having to revalidate from the server. So you have that ability, but in any case that the original installation of your application fails and you would like to to validate every time your application installs, there might be a breakage there in the ability to validate. So having a clear validation function here allows you to fix that problem for your customers. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and we're going to look at this screen a little bit more.